My husband's family invited me to a surprise family meeting. I had a weird feeling in my stomach at that time. When I got there, they handed me divorce papers and said, "Sign these or you will regret it." I smiled and took out my own papers and said, "Actually, I have a surprise for you too." My husband's jaw dropped open when he saw what it was. My husband's face was worth watching at that time. Before I move on with the story, please subscribe to the channel so that you keep getting such interesting stories. I wasn't expecting an invitation, especially not from them. My husband's family had never been particularly warm toward me. From the moment we got married, I always felt like an outsider, like they were just tolerating me because they had no choice. So, when a message popped up in the family group chat calling for a surprise family meeting, I had to read it twice. A surprise? From them? Something about it didn't sit right with me. There was no mention of what it was about, no explanation, just a time and place. My mother-in-law, the same woman who once told me I wasn't good enough for her son, had personally sent the message. That alone was enough to raise alarms in my head. I stared at my phone for a long time, debating whether I should even go. My gut told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant evening. But another part of me, one that had learned to read between the lines, felt like I needed to be there. If they were planning something, I had to see it for myself. So I got dressed, slipped my own documents into my bag, just in case, and made my way to their house. As I pulled up to their grand driveway, a strange calm settled over me. Whatever they had planned, they clearly thought they had the upper hand. I almost laughed to myself. They had no idea what was coming. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words, and something else, something colder. It wasn't just a family gathering. It was an ambush. I looked around the room, taking in the faces staring back at me. My husband's parents sat in their usual spots, his mother with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, his father leaning back like a king waiting for his subjects to bow. His siblings were there too, each one watching me like I was the main act in a show they had been dying to see. Even a few distant relatives had shown up, their expressions unreadable, but their presence alone made my stomach tighten. And then, there was my husband. He stood off to the side, his hands shoved into his pockets, refusing to meet my eyes. That told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just aware of whatever was about to happen. He was part of it. No one greeted me, no fake smiles, no small talk, nothing. Just silence. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second stretching out as if the room itself was holding its breath. My heels clicked against the floor as I took a few steps forward, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. I wasn't sure if I should sit down or stay standing. Then, my mother-in-law finally spoke. "Close the door," she said, her voice calm but firm. Not "please close the door," just an order like I was some disobedient child who had walked in past curfew. I took my time turning around to push the door shut, inhaling deeply as I faced them again. They were all still staring, waiting for something. I forced a small smile. "All right," I said, my voice steady despite the knots in my stomach. "What's this surprise meeting about?" No one answered right away. Instead, my father-in-law reached into a folder on the table, pulled out a thick stack of papers and slid them toward me. "Sign these," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "or you'll regret it." And just like that, I knew exactly why I was here. I stared at the papers in front of me, my eyes tracing the bold black letters at the top. Divorce agreement. No small talk, no fake sympathy. Just straight to business. My mother-in-law sat up straighter, her fingers tapping impatiently on the table. "Sign them," she repeated, her voice sharper this time, "or you'll regret it." I let out a slow breath, lifting my gaze to look at her. Her expression was smug, as if she had already won. As if I was supposed to crumble at the sight of a few sheets of paper. My father-in-law leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, nodding as if to back up his wife's words. My husband still hadn't said a word. He just stood there, staring at the floor. His jaw locked so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. I glanced around the room. His siblings looked entertained, as if they were watching some reality show drama unfold. A couple of the distant relatives shifted awkwardly, but no one spoke up. They all knew. They had all been waiting for this moment. This wasn't something they had come up with overnight. No, this had been planned. The secrecy, the surprise meeting, the fact that they had all gathered here like a jury about to hand down a sentence, it was all carefully arranged, and I was the last to know. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, but I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I looked directly at my husband. "Is this what you want?" I asked him, my voice calm, almost casual. He didn't answer right away. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Then, finally, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Coward. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but it wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was something else, something sharper. I tilted my head slightly, letting my fingers tap against the wooden surface. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, my eyes moving back to his mother. Her lips curled into a tight smile. "Then things will get very difficult for you," she said smoothly. A threat. A poorly veiled one at that. I exhaled through my nose, biting back a smirk. They really thought they had me cornered. But they had no idea what was coming. I didn't react the way they expected me to. No gasps, no tears, no desperate pleading, just silence. And then I smiled. A slow, knowing smirk crept onto my lips as I leaned back in my chair. My fingers toyed with the strap of my bag for a moment before I reached inside, my movements deliberate, unhurried. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. Then, with a satisfying rustle of paper, I pulled out my own neatly stacked set of documents and placed them right on top of theirs. "Actually," I said, my voice light, almost amused, "I have a surprise for you too." The shift in the room was instant. My husband's face went pale the second he caught sight of what I was holding. His hands twitched at his sides, and for the first time that night, I saw something other than arrogance or indifference in his expression. I saw fear. His mother frowned, sitting up straighter. "What is that?" she demanded, her confidence faltering just slightly. I tilted my head, tapping a manicured nail against the top page. "Oh, just something I've been working on," I mused. "See, I had a feeling this little meeting of yours wasn't going to end in cake and champagne. So I came prepared." No one moved. I took my time flipping through the pages, letting the sound fill the tense silence. My husband's breathing had grown uneven, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. He recognized the documents. He knew exactly what they meant. "This," I continued, dragging out the moment, "is my own divorce agreement, but unlike yours, mine comes with a few extra surprises," his mother scoffed, trying to regain control. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have any—" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Oh, but I do," I said smoothly. "Bank statements, transaction records, proof of infidelity, and—" I slid one page out and turned it toward my husband, watching his eyes widen as he read the words. "A little notice that's going to make your whole family very uncomfortable." His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. I leaned in, dropping my voice just enough for the words to sting. "You wanted to blindside me," I whispered. "Too bad. I got there first." His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, his eyes darting across the neatly printed words. With each passing second, the color drained further from his face. I watched him closely, taking in the way his fingers tightened around the edges of the paper, how his breathing grew shallow. He wasn't just reading a divorce agreement. He was watching his carefully built house of lies come crashing down. Unlike the simple one-sided contract his family had shoved in front of me, mine was thorough. Mine had weight. Mine had teeth. His mother leaned forward, snatching a page from his hands. "What is this?" she snapped, scanning the document. "Oh, just a little collection of truths," I said lightly, folding my hands on the table. "Let's start with the bank transactions, shall we?" I tapped the paper he was gripping, the one detailing every shady little financial move he had tried to hide. "You see, while you were busy sneaking around, you weren't as careful as you thought. You really should have covered your tracks better." My husband swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he tried to find his voice. "This isn't—" "Oh, it is," I cut in, my tone sharp. "Every dollar, every account, every gift you bought for her. All right there, and before you try to deny it, I had a forensic accountant go through everything. So please, go ahead and tell me how it's all a big misunderstanding." Silence. His father grabbed another sheet, and his face turned a dangerous shade of red. "What the hell is this?" I sighed dramatically. "Ah, yes, the hidden assets. The ones your precious son thought he could keep off the books. Offshore accounts, secret investments. Oh, and let's not forget the little property he conveniently forgot to mention in the prenup." I gave a pointed look. "The one in his mistress's name." His mother shot up from her chair. "Lies," she hissed. I chuckled. "That's cute." Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I pulled out the final page, the one that made my husband's breath hitch. An eviction notice. "For the house you live in," I said, tilting my head. "Since, technically, I own it. And after the divorce, you all," I gestured around the room, "will be out on the street." Now that was a surprise they hadn't seen coming. For a moment there was absolute silence. And then, all hell broke loose. His mother shot up from her chair so fast that it nearly toppled over. "This is ridiculous," she screeched, her face twisted in fury. "You can't do this. You won't do this." Her voice was so shrill it felt like it could shatter glass, but I remained calm, leaning back in my seat as if I were watching a particularly amusing scene in a movie. His father wasn't any better. His face turned an alarming shade of red, veins bulging at his temples as he slammed a fist against the table. "You think you can waltz in here and take everything? You're out of your damn mind." I tilted my head slightly, unimpressed. "I don't think I can. I know I can." The shouting only grew louder. His siblings joined in, throwing out accusations, calling me names, trying to make me feel like the villain in their twisted story. "She's lying," one of them snapped. "This is a setup," another yelled. "You're just a gold-digging—" I held up a single finger, and to my surprise, the noise actually died down just enough for me to speak. "You all seem a little confused," I said, my voice smooth, steady. "You thought you had the upper hand. You thought I was just going to sit here, sign your little papers, and walk away quietly." I let my gaze sweep across the room, landing on my husband last. He was still sitting, gripping the edges of the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright, his mouth opened, then closed, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and the documents as if searching for a loophole and escape. "There's got to be a way to fix this," he muttered under his breath, almost like he was talking to himself. "Maybe if we—" I laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, now you want to fix things?" I asked, shaking my head. "No, sweetheart. That ship sailed the moment you thought you could ambush me." His mother pointed a shaking finger at me. "We made you. You were nothing before this family." I met her glare with a smirk. "Then you should have made me your ally instead of your enemy." And with that, the room plunged into stunned silence. I leaned back in my chair, completely at ease, while they all seethed around me. The chaos had died down just enough for my next words to land exactly how I wanted them to. "You thought you could blindside me," I said, shaking my head in mock disappointment. "I knew about your affair. I knew about the accounts you tried to hide. And most importantly—" I paused, letting my gaze lock onto my husband, who looked like he was about to be sick. "I knew exactly how to take everything from you before you even had the chance to try." His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. His mother inhaled sharply, her hands shaking. "You're bluffing," she spat. "You have nothing." I smiled. Oh, she was going to regret saying that. "Really?" I mused. flipping through the neatly organized documents in front of me. Because according to these, I slid a page across the table, tapping it lightly, I own half of everything. And since your dear son was reckless enough to commit financial fraud while still legally tied to me, well, let's just say things are about to get very uncomfortable for all of you. My husband's face darkened. You wouldn't... I cut him off with a raised brow. What, wouldn't I? The air in the room shifted. For the first time, the realization fully sank in. I wasn't just threatening them, I was telling them how it was going to be. His siblings sat frozen as if they were just now realizing the full extent of what was happening. His father, who had been so full of rage just moments ago, looked winded, like someone had sucked the air right out of him. And my husband, he was powerless. For so long he and his family had controlled everything. They had dictated the terms, expected me to follow their rules, assumed I would always be one step behind. But now, I was holding all the cards, and they knew it. So, I said, standing up and adjusting my bag, I'd start packing if I were you. That house you love so much, you won't be living in it much longer. And for the first time since I walked into that room, no one had anything to say. I picked up the pen slowly, twirling it between my fingers as I glanced at my husband. His eyes were wide, his face pale, his lips slightly parted like he wanted to say something. But he didn't, because he knew there was nothing left to say. With a small, satisfied sigh, I leaned forward and signed my divorce papers, on my terms. The sound of my pen scratching across the paper was the only thing that filled the silence. His family, once so smug and confident, now sat in stunned disbelief. I could practically hear their thoughts racing, scrambling for a way to undo this, to salvage even a shred of the control they once had. Too late. I straightened up, took their pathetic excuse for a divorce agreement, the one they had so arrogantly shoved in front of me, and flicked it aside like it was nothing more than a piece of trash. It fluttered to the floor, landing near my mother-in-law's feet. This meeting was a great idea, I said, my voice light with amusement. Really, I had a wonderful time. I grabbed my bag, adjusting the strap over my shoulder, and turned toward the door. For the first time all night, no one stopped me. No shouting, no threats, no last-ditch efforts to manipulate me into staying. Just silence. I walked past my husband, and as I did, I leaned in just slightly, just enough for only him to hear. You should have been smarter, I murmured. Now you'll lose everything. His breath hitched, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me look back. With my head held high, I stepped out of that house, the same house they would soon be forced to leave behind, and into my new life. A life without them. And damn, it had never felt better to walk away. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline was still coursing through me, my heart pounding, not with fear but with exhilaration. I had done it. I had walked in there with nothing but my wits and the truth, and I had left with everything, my freedom, my dignity, my power. And yet, the night wasn't over just yet. As I reached the end of the driveway, a sleek black car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I already knew who it was before the tinted window rolled down. My lawyer sat in the passenger seat, her expression cool and professional as always. But it wasn't just her. Sitting in the back seat was him, the man my husband thought I'd never find. The one person who had the kind of evidence that could ruin him beyond just a divorce. The final nail in his coffin. I let out a slow, satisfied breath. Perfect timing. The door opened and he stepped out, stretching his arms like he had all the time in the world. He glanced at me with a knowing smirk before shifting his gaze toward the house behind me. So, he said, his voice casual, did they enjoy the little surprise? I chuckled. Oh, they loved it. My lawyer stepped forward, handing me a folder. Everything's in place, she confirmed. Once this goes through, he won't just lose the house, he'll lose his entire reputation. I flipped open the folder, scanning the documents. Emails, bank transfers, signed agreements, all leading to one undeniable truth. My husband hadn't just cheated. He had committed fraud. Serious fraud. And the man standing next to me, he had all the proof. I glanced back toward the house where I could still hear faint arguing through the walls. They were scrambling, panicking, trying to figure out their next move. Too late. I shut the folder with a quiet snap and smiled. My divorce was just the beginning, I murmured. And with that, I slid into the car, leaving behind the ruins of the life they thought I couldn't live without. But the truth was, I had never felt more free.